Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nicole Zafian. I'm the head of content and education here at CLOC, and we're thrilled to bring you today's Ask the Experts panel, the Changemakers Toolkit, with our presenting sponsor, Ironclad. Just real quick housekeeping things to get you started and enjoy your session. We have our chat feature, which you can use to share your thoughts and chat with each other and connect with each other. And then we have our Q&A box as well, where you can put in any questions for the panel. So you submitted some questions ahead of time that the panel's prepared to respond to, so thank you for submitting those. And also, if there's time, they'll try to respond to some of the live questions. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off and to Mary, who will start off the session. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I'm super excited for today's conversation as we discuss best practices for change management and driving adoption in legal technology for things like CLM. When you invest in a contracting platform, it can be very daunting as you take your first step in transforming your business, right? And it's not just about transforming your legal department, it is about transforming your entire organization. And so to become more effective, efficient, and productive, there's a lot of things you have to think about. You may have picked like the right solution for yourself and now maybe developed a well thought out implementation plan, but then comes the hardest part, change management. We always talk about that being the hardest part of the job. And we all know that a tech implementation is a mix of three things: people, process, and technology. You've heard all of us say that several times. And change management is particularly hard because of the people aspect of it. So how are you going to think about and manage and drive change in the way that you do business today? How are you going to ensure that your business is going to actually adopt and use the software? Because if you don't, it's sort of useless, right? So to help answer these questions today, I'm excited to have experts join us from L'Oreal, Impossible Foods, and NS1. Let me quickly just back up and introduce myself as I realized I skipped that. So I'm Mary O'Carroll. I'm Chief Community Officer at Ironclad. I'm formerly the CLOC President and formerly Director of Legal Ops at Google. I am super happy to be here back with the CLOC family and working on this with you. So let's start with brief introductions from each of you. I will start with Charles.
Great. Thanks, Mary. Happy to be here today to chat a little bit about our experiences and our legal transformation that started about 4 years ago or so. I'm Charles Furr. I'm Associate General Counsel at L'Oreal, based in New York City. And I oversee primarily technology contracts, but do a lot of other work with many of our 35 different brands. So.
Great, thank you. Angela, to you.
Hi, my name is Angela Mendenhall. I'm the Senior Corporate Paralegal at Impossible Foods. I've been here about 3.5 years, and yeah, that's basically my story. I do everything there from our contract management platform to everything else so that supports our legal team. Looking forward to talking with all of you about how you can implement contract management system.
Excellent. And last but not least, Jacqueline.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline, and I love change. I'm currently the Senior Manager of Legal Operations at NS1, and before that, I spent 5 years at a major German freight forwarder where I discovered, even though I was a paralegal there, that what I was actually doing was legal operations. Super excited to talk about this topic. It was my mandate when I was hired at NS1 to implement a CLM, and there was a lot of work that needed to be done, even just like the first 30 days that I was there. So thank you so much for having me.
Great, what a great group. Is my video working now? I kind of understand we had some technical issues. Okay, we're good. Excellent. Great. So our goal for today is for folks on the line to walk away with an understanding about how to better align your technology, your contracting technology with your business strategy, how to work with, communicate with your stakeholders internally, how to do an audit of your processes, how to think about the launch, how to think about your deployment, how to think about change management, all the kind of things that go along with success in launching something like this. So since this is an Ask the Expert discussion, I believe this is the first of CLOC's Ask the Experts, an honor to be a part of that. We've got some questions from our audience that they've submitted in advance of this call, so we're going to dig right in. Would love for this to be more of a guys. The first question is just really the basics, okay? So how do you even define change management? What does that mean to you? And sort of more specifically, do you like to take a top-down or a bottoms-up approach when you think about that for your organization? would like to start?
I can
Let's
kick us
go
off.
with, yeah, please.
I define change management as basically anything that you want to change. And so I also was brought into Impossible Foods specifically to get a contract management system up and running. We were still very much in email form. At legal, can we, get something from you? Can you review this contract for us? And we could quickly see that we were going to start drowning in that system. And I think you have to look at change management from both levels, top down and bottom up. And you have to get buy-in from the top. Obviously, that's where the money and the financing for the platform is probably going to come from. You've got budget stakeholders. But I think after that, you have to look bottom up is the better approach, in my opinion. Look at the users that are actually going to be using it on the everyday basis and the other stakeholders that are going to be part of your process potentially. And if you don't start with those people and think about how they're going to use it and how it's going to impact their daily work, you've failed before you've ever even started, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Angela. For me, the user is always front and center, right? I came into my current organization with our CLM solution already, picked out and sold by my GC to the rest of leadership. So my job is really to think about what is, so many times, like we're implementing something, we're also the product manager for the solution that we pick, right? Because we're the intermediary between the actual, service and our users. So thinking about is this actually going to be something that makes their life easier, I guess. For me, change management is about making that evolution, because really to me, it's not just any change, it's a positive change, it's a constructive change, it's a change that makes everyone's life easier, lifts burdens, eases the transition. So how do you make that digestible and palatable? And you can't do that without having the user front and center. So gaining trust so that you can elicit feedback is super key in this process. And also, again, making it palatable one piece at a time. A change can be overwhelming, especially if you don't think that it's in your benefit. So I really try to make my users feel like they have a hand in the evolution of the process, right? So process, then tool, always the user.
Yeah, absolutely. Making people feel heard is so important in the process. Charles, anything to add?
True, and I was going to say, well, at L'Oreal, we undertook a legal transformation that took us from very traditional ways of working as lawyers to a contract management system that really creates a portal for us to work directly with our clients. And when I think about the change management, I think about different groups. I think about, because this is legal software, I think about the lawyers, and I think about how am I going to get the lawyers to use it? And I think they are probably, as a group, the most reluctant to change their ways. They have been successful working the way they have and getting things done the way they do. And if you ask them to throw it all out the window and try something different, it's oftentimes met with resistance from the legal teams in particular. The customers, our clients, the marketing teams and the like, all took to the technology very, very quickly. Many of them are younger than our legal staff and used to working online, working in a SaaS type platform, and really want to be able to work whenever they are available. They don't want to have to schedule a meeting with the lawyer to go through the document. So there are different constituencies and different challenges with each, for sure.
Yeah, I love what you said earlier, because I think that no change management is sort of like the best kind of change management if you kind of bring people along. But the hardest part about change management, as you mentioned, is even convincing people that there is a problem to be solving in the first place, right? If they've been doing it for a long time and things are working just fine, like how do we tell them that there actually is a better way forward? Even if you are doing something well, right? There's always room for improvement. So the next question is kind of related to that. It's about building a business case. So how have you all found it most effective in convincing stakeholders that something like a CLM, a contract lifecycle management system and tooling, will actually save time and money, will make their lives better, will help your all those things that we all already know?
Yeah, for us, I mean, I think It's hard to make a case for ROI in a financial sense to really quantify that, especially when you're starting out, to understand what really are going to be the time savings here. For us, I think one of the most compelling reasons for doing something like this was from a compliance perspective, and having better oversight over what templates are being used by the business. So someone's not just pulling the old document out of the folder that they used 3 years ago for another deal, but they're coming to a central place, and we're able to manage that in a centralized way and make sure that people are using the right forms, the right people are signing the documents, all of those sorts of things.
I agree. I think, oops, go ahead.
I'll just quickly add that, sometimes, like, I listen for the case sometimes, right? And this is, just post CLM implementation, but there are use cases that maybe weren't considered when we were first thinking about putting together this management system for a contract, where I listen for a pain point, and my expertise on the tool will help me think of ways to leverage that, right? So this is, again, from a perspective not necessarily of launching, but of engaging other stakeholders, maybe a security team, for instance, that has pointed out an issue with, well, how do we save something? How do we save something? There's a very manual process for this. How do we maintain oversight, with all these concerns? And then I almost just come up with a solution and have the tool sell itself, right? Mm-hmm. But listening is so important to understand those pain points and then offer just a way to lift that burden.
I completely agree with both of those. Compliance is a great way into the door. Like, we have to be compliant, especially for, companies that are looking to grow, looking to eventually go public, maybe looking for a variety of things, fundraising, even if you are going to stay private, forever, whatever the case may be. Compliance is a huge issue there that I think helps drag people along. But the other part then is listening to your stakeholders and solving a problem for them. One of the ones that we had was our accounting team would get an invoice. And that was the first time they'd learned that there was a vendor that needed to be paid when the invoice was coming in. And at that point, it's kind of too late to negotiate our payment terms or anything else. That had already happened. And so we used our contract management system to pull accounting into the process from the beginning, so that their first instance of learning that a vendor needed to be paid was not when they got the invoice. They had potentially days, if not weeks or months, to know that something was coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, what you guys have all talked about is really knowing your stakeholders, knowing your audience, right? And change management and how you're trying to sell this improvement, this product, is really about knowing what is a pain point for them, right? For the lawyers, it's going to be different than it is from finance. It's going to be different from the procurement team. So really knowing where their pain points are and trying to demonstrate, or having the system and tool demonstrate how that outcome is going to be better. So with that, kind of all of you guys have had, successful CLM rollouts and adoption. What was the biggest challenge, though, in that process, perhaps, of getting people to adopt a system? How did you conquer it? What made adoption successful in your organizations, which we know are different sizes, different industries, and probably had different challenges? Let's start with Jacqueline.
I would say what was most useful for me was, again, so just to recap, I started at a company with my CLM picked out, and within the first 30 days, I had to master and understand the tool, engineer the solution, and then roll it out. And we started out by rolling it out to one organization, right? You're not just going to all of a sudden, request that every single functional org starts using this tool. If you start small with an iterative process, because that allows you to gain feedback based on, certain needs. And you start out small, we started out with the simplest kind of contracts, MSAs and NDAs, super common, maybe not necessarily for customers because you obviously enter into NDAs with many different partners, but I started there, and I came out with a slew of training materials, with a training guide, with a lot of one-on-ones to understand what it was from our account executives that was really an issue before. And I discovered a lot of things. It just in that first sort of 30 days before I rolled it out, and in that second 30 days after it was already in their hands, right? Like if something unclear, I was able to pick up on pain points that they had with the new tool, and then that informed the way that the second version of that training guide came out. So it was starting small, getting feedback to then come back and improve the tool to roll it out to another organization or for other workflows or different purposes. So, and also building trust, because that's what that engenders when you're listening and then making a change based on specific feedback to address that.
Yeah, that's such great advice. Starting small, getting a group of people really excited about it, and then having them advocate for you within the organization, and then the other groups will want to follow suit. That's great advice. Angela, Charles?
I did it almost exactly the opposite way. I sometimes felt that within our org, starting small was not the right way to do it. I think when you have, when I started this, there was about 250 employees. A lot of them had been there, close to the beginning. They were going on their third year with Impossible Foods, or it had been a while for them. And I see this pull up, and I ripped the Band-Aid off and replaced the system. I did not leave any wiggle room. And I think to do that, you have to have buy-in from the legal stakeholders, from the legal top. And I did. I had buy-in to say, you do not have to accept contracts via email any longer. And if you do, I had a nice templated response that we would send back to them with instructions of how to upload into our new system, how to get the feedback they needed, screenshots, everything like that. But I replaced our entire system overnight. We went from accepting emails one day to not accepting them the next day any longer. And we went with everything. So any request that came in, small from a templated NDA, which was one of our first workflows, all the way to third-party contracts that were 200 pages, should be moving through our new system. And I found that putting in the work beforehand to talk to stakeholders, letting them know that if there was any issues, they could be addressed quickly and updated in real time, that it wasn't a whole system change, or it wasn't going to be a 5-hour maintenance window in the middle of the day and the system would be down, helped reassure them that by moving forward in this fashion, we could iterate as we went, which is exactly what we did. And I think that helped our business just jump on board, and having a system that you've already talked to a lot of people about and gotten buy-in from major key stakeholders really helped us just rip the Band-Aid off and replace and go.
Yeah. Well, and for us, we took an iterative process, and we started small, which is not the way large organizations like L'Oreal typically work. And I think we were successful because we took that approach. We went from one workflow in the United States to now we have over 100 workflows in 19 different countries, and continuing to expand globally. And the way we did that was by starting small, getting buy-in from the legal team. That is absolutely key. Our process was really managed by the legal team as opposed to by an IT team or a procurement or sourcing team that would typically handle this type of an acquisition of technology. So I think that's how we were successful, was by starting small, building trust, building enthusiasm, and the enthusiasm came with as the customers, as our clients and the business teams started using it. They became the ambassadors to the rest of the organization, and they were the ones that were talking it up and excited about new ways of working.
And what did all of you guys have kind of before you went into this journey in putting in a new CLM? Was it just email? Was there an old system? What were people using before?
We used primarily email, and we had a document repository that was built on SharePoint, and we did some custom programming on top of SharePoint to create reminders and things like that for our document repository. But we had nothing in the way of contract generation. And again, we had lots of templates out there in lots of people's personal folders, and they would just grab whatever they saw and started working. So bringing it together has really helped.
Same for me. It's email, and it's interesting. I've been at another company where even though we almost had like an IT ticketing system in place where you would email an email address, and then on our end, we would see it as this collection of tickets, but then all the tracking, all the statuses, you know, like had to be done manually. You know, I constantly had to be checking in with the team of my attorneys to see where something was, because we didn't have access to obviously those emails. It wasn't centralized. It was very piecemeal and a very arduous process to even try to collect data from a system like that.
And we were also using email.
Yeah, so that's super interesting, particularly because you guys still had to convince your stakeholders, had to convince people that this is broken, that there is a better way. And sort of now that you're over the fence, do your stakeholders now think, oh gosh, what was I thinking before? And this is so much better? Or like, I guess the reason I ask that is because I often tell folks when they're trying to convince, you know, their lawyers, their stakeholders, that there even is a problem to solve here. Like you said, Charles, things are fine. We've been doing this way for years. You know, one of the things I say is actually talk to someone else who's gone through it, because they will tell you how eye-opening, you know, it is looking backwards, how things have changed.
One of our biggest use cases for our contract generation platform are influencer contracts, and that is a part of our business that has just skyrocketed in terms of the number of contracts. Suddenly we're doing thousands of contracts with individuals, and there is no way we could have managed that without this type of system. We could never have kept up without adding another 10 lawyers to our team. It's that straightforward.
When I was putting together like the first guide to using my CLM, front and center, right at the top, was the explanation for why we were doing this, right? And it was based on just like my first few weeks at this company, understanding that things were taking a little bit longer, you know, and sometimes you couldn't predict when a request was going to be turned around, or you weren't sure who was working on it, and is it with one team or another, because we're a very sales-driven organization. And, you know, before a contract even gets to legal, it has to go through our sales operations function. And so right away, the opportunity was there to explain to people and to sell it by explaining that this is going to be a window to the status of your request. You're always going to know where this is. You're always going to know what your next step is. You're going to know who's reviewing it and whose course it is. And, you know, with that hesitation, I think I read somewhere like, oh, well, now we have to use another app. It's like, actually, we're eliminating an app because now you don't have to manually get this signed through DocuSign, which is wonderful, because I will explain that transition later when I had to cut off DocuSign in order to funnel everyone into my CLM. But you sell it at the top. I mean, and it has to actually be a solution that's going to make life easier, that's going to lend more clarity, not something that's going to be more complicated, but that you can explain in as least words as possible.
Yeah, fantastic. We do have a bunch of questions that are popping up from the audience. So to those in the audience, keep them coming, but I'll start with some of these. I see a theme for a couple of them about just KPIs, key performance indicators and metrics, basically, right? So we have the idea we're often told we cannot control what we cannot measure. How do you do an audit, or, you know, kind of like what are the KPIs? Or I guess they're saying, how do you even audit your KPIs, or how do you even know anything without having a CLM in place? Or did you do it manually? Was there even a way to measure anything, or was it kind of a black box?
It was a little bit of a black box for us at Impossible. And I think the manual process, if you've got to sell that you need a platform or a new solution or change in any fashion, regardless of whether you're buying something or just changing a process internally, you've got to show why it's not working. And sometimes that does take the manual work, and you have to show what's happening. And so for us with email, we could show we got the email, and then it got buried under 400 other emails. And then we got a follow-up email 2 weeks later that said, hey, was this thing done? And then we quickly glanced at it, looked at it for 5 minutes, made a couple edits, you know, and sent it out for signature. And we could just, from a legal perspective, from a compliance perspective, from continuity perspective, it was easy to show that we weren't making good decisions. We weren't making the same decisions from email to email to email because there was no way to track them. We could show that we had updated our template but it hadn't been disseminated down to everyone's personal folders on their personal desktop. Those things were easy to show when I asked, hey, can you send me the version you're working off of? And it was not our latest version. For the actual days it takes or those types of really specific ones, sometimes tracking manually, just having a spreadsheet, okay, got the email this day, took me this long to do it, got red lines back, and just having, that kind of, what is it, like in law firm life when you have to bill your hours, kind of thinking about it that way sometimes does have to happen. And I think if you just do it even for a month, it's easy to show, a general idea of how it's working or not working.
I just want to quickly mention when we're talking about KPIs, one other point of resistance from the legal team. I think a lot of the lawyers, they came from law firms where they were billing, now they're in-house, and the last thing they want is to be measured on their productivity by some platform. And, it took a certain amount of reassurance to the legal team that wasn't what this was about. This isn't about measuring your throughput of contracts and your response times and things like that. And that's not going to be part of your evaluation. We will probably have some of those numbers, but that's not why we're doing this. And that's, I think, is a hurdle for lawyers, especially who come from law firms and they've been measured all their career. And now it's like, I don't have to keep track of every 10 minutes.
Yeah, very, very true. Kind of related to the change management of lawyers, like how do you handle situations where attorneys feel that technology seems administrative in that they've got to enter information, maybe they have to take an extra step? How do you convince the attorneys that typing in the information or extra step is worth their time and experienced?
I would say one way to do it is demonstrating that by having, just for example, in the CLM, system that we use, it's workflow based, right? So if somebody is out of the office, if somebody needs to take time out of the office, we can't have business slow down. So what that does is it allows everybody to be on the same page. And it doesn't have to be something that it's a note. If you look at it, give us a few updates and bullet points, and we can see your red lines. We're all on the same page. We all have access to this workflows. It just allows for so much flexibility so that one person isn't necessarily tied to something, and we're not going to slow business down if something comes up or if you need to work on something else. It really allows everyone to pitch in and to participate. And then if you, for example, have an issue that comes up a little bit later, months later, years later, and we have a system of record to refer to where we're not just looking at red lines, but we're also able to keep track of the conversation and the key points that were important at the time and where we left off and who approved what, that's a boon to you later. And renewals come up, things have to be renegotiated, if something's litigated. You want to be able to track where we were and what our thought process was at that time. So that's the key benefit, I think, to having everyone have that transparency for a matter that you couldn't do if it was just in your inbox.
Yeah. When I read this question, I kind of thought when I was at Google and we were evaluating technology, if it was going to take an extra click or make the work for the attorney more than the current state, that was like dead to us. Like that is not something we would have wanted to adopt, because the adoption, right? We talked about adoption being everything. If people don't adopt it because there's an extra step, then the whole system fails. And I think that you need to find tools that when the attorney goes in, they go, aha, this is so much better than the old way. Why would I do it the old way, right? So that's my whole philosophy of no change management is better than change management. Right?
True. One of the system we have allows for the customers, the clients, our clients, to go in and fill in all the information. So it is less work for the lawyer in reality, because I'm not pulling up a form and replacing bracketed language and things like that. It's the client put it in and it goes into the draft directly. So it's less work
right.
from a sort of administrative perspective for a lawyer using a system, a management system, I think.
Yeah, and so my guess is then the lawyers adopted that system for you quite easily when they sort of saw how much easier it was.
Well, yeah, not across the board. There are a few holdouts, but we're getting there.
Okay, let's see. Do you have any recommendations for how to implement a CLM that needs to be used for different types of workflows within one organization with very different stakeholder groups? For example, publication versus research groups versus real estate groups, I assume versus HR, sales, etc.
This is how our workflows currently work at Impossible. I think it depends on the contract management system that you're looking at, and you need to make sure it has those capabilities. The one we use does. I have currently, I started out with very general workflows, so they either intook counterparty paper, and it was from anybody in the company, whether you were HR, sales, IT, R&D. It just intook paper and asked some very generic questions. And then I had another very general one that didn't spit out a template. It spit out basically a blank document, but it was the ability for anybody in those organizations, in those departments, to ask us to create something. They would tell us what they wanted, and then we would upload. Version 2 would be this created document that we created. And that served us for the first 3 years using our current platform. And I just redid it now to make it much more specific. So we now have 7, what I call, I grouped all of our teams and departments into 7 functions across the company. So sales is now all of sales. R&D, regardless of how many different subgroups they have, is all of R&D. We have, supply chain, manufacturing, kind of all grouped together. HR is its own group, international is its own group. And we're asking those teams now more specific questions that pertain to them. So I'm not going to ask the R&D team, how many pounds are you selling, per month to this vendor, because that doesn't apply to the R&D team. That only applies to sales. And we created these 7 workflows now that are much more specific to them, but they serve the same function. It's still a way for them either to get us the counterparty paper or to request that we generate a template for them. We're just asking more questions up front based on what team they are part of, rather than waiting for them to request it and then asking it to them via email or in the chat feature that the system has. We're just gathering more information up front. So I think it's very doable as long as you find the right system for that allows for that customization.
Agreed. Like I said, I keep mentioning my CLM. It happens to be Ironclad. And what I love about it is the flexibility. And you can condition questions that would then, for example, for this question, solicit a different set of stakeholders, and you can condition it on what department you're in, what kind of contract it might be, just endlessly condition it to bring up different stakeholders depending on the matter. So as Angela said, if you need that kind of flexibility, that's a key feature that you should be looking for in your CLM. I don't think that everyone does it, but when you have something that's very open-ended like that, sky's the limit. That's the way I feel about my current CLM.
I think it's important to make sure that whatever system you're using has flexibility, because you're not going to have one path to approval. So you need to have the flexibility to create different paths, say, for each workflow, and to have the ability to change that path on the fly by adding another approver suddenly who wants to see the document, or adding a signatory. That kind of flexibility is really important. So, that was one of the reasons we chose what we did.
So kind of related to this, there's a question about resourcing when it comes to implementing and change management. You guys have all done pretty big implementations and rollouts. What are your thoughts on what kind of resourcing, internally or externally, is required to be successful in something like this?
That was a huge factor in picking systems. I demoed 5, I think. They were brought on site. They had an hour to show me what the system did. I left dizzy by some of them. I'm sure they could have tracked KPIs and told me where everybody was in the world and geotag them. I don't know. I'm sure it could have done amazing things, but I couldn't see a need for all of that. And I left some of the presentations feeling like when you go to a movie and the camera work is too shaky and it's just, too actiony. I left almost feeling sick from some of the presentations. I was just like, there's a lot there, but it's almost too much. And if I was going to be the person, and I was the person that had to handle all of that, it needed to make sense in how I thought and how I worked. And it needed to make sense for our business. And since we did the rip the Band-Aid off approach to the entire company, I had to have something that worked for our 21-year-old recent college graduates that were up on every technology, as well as, Pat Brown, our founder. Like, it needed to work for everyone in between the different age groups, the different generations, the different abilities, the different technologies. And finding a system that does that is key, I think, in making that happen. And so find a system that works for what you need it to work for. Don't just type in best system in, top 10 best systems and then pick the number one. It might be amazing, but how are you going to be able to change it? Are you going to be able to do those things on the fly? Are you going to be able to add an extra approver? What if there's a typo and you're just seeing it now? Can you change it live instantly? I can. Those things are really important sometimes.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is that you probably had limited internal resources, and so that factored in, like, you didn't need like a huge IT team to help you, right?
Yes. Sorry. I was like, where was I going with this question? Yes.
We do that all the time.
I was like, I started talking about something. Yes, I was able to completely do it on my own, did not need IT to code or manage anything. And then the CLM was able to bring everything else to the table quickly, which I think was huge for us. So when you're looking at resources, we implemented another platform for something completely different, and it's very difficult. It is hard to work in, and the resources, it is taking so much more energy. So as long as you're comfortable in the platform and you can kind of be that super admin user, I think that makes a huge difference. And as long as the platform is then responsive as well, you're using less outside resources. And that was one of the things we looked at. Our couple other of our attorneys on our team at the time had used other platforms, and they had talked about how cumbersome they were. And I'd talked to other people that had said they bring in a third party every quarter to clean up the system. And it just struck me as odd. Why have a system that you have to then bring a third party in every quarter to clean up? That just didn't make sense to me. So we went simple. Let's just see how it goes that way. And I think that was better for us and used less resources all around.
I think for us too, I mean, we do have huge IT teams, but this particular project, I said before, was led by legal, and I firmly believe that had a big part in the success that we've had. It wasn't IT coming in and saying, here, you need to use this. It was, here's something that's going to solve a very specific problem for the lawyers. Solve that problem first, get that built. And then if you want to integrate with Salesforce or you want to integrate with your procurement system, but a lot of companies and big companies, oftentimes they'll spend a year scoping it and try and solve 20 problems, and then the implementation takes a ton of resources and a ton of time. And that's not necessarily the best way to get the tools in front of the people that need it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine working within a system that I wasn't able to update myself, especially considering, during implementation, all the tweaks you might have to make, or would you then have to rely on either an internal sales team or even, on your customer success person on the product side of the CLM you're using to constantly have to guide you and walk you through things. I think simplicity is key, and I think that's going to tell you a lot about how simple it is going to be for your users. Right? If you can understand it simply, then you're going to be the one to be able to solve those problems for them. So that's something I think very key to pay attention to when selecting a product.
Yeah, that's all great. Here's a great question that I love, because it's just really relevant to our current times with everyone in this dominantly remote environment, right? As you roll out a new technology, as you roll out a new CLM, what are some of the best practices for training people, legal teams, business teams, when everyone's kind of remote? What are the models that you've used for successful adoption in something like that?
I think the models are similar to what you would do to a live in-person office environment. We have open office hours twice a week. They're on everyone's calendar as just an open office hour. Just come, ask questions, ask what the status of it is, whatever the case may be. We have a Slack channel that's dedicated that I manage that people can ask questions there. We have videos that we've done, videos that our CLM has produced that we have in a folder that's available to everybody in the company to look at. It's linked to the open office hour calendar invite, so it's not something they have to search for. It should just be easy. I think just making yourself available, and honestly, finding the system that's easier. I sometimes sit in open office hours by myself, not doing other work because no one comes. There's not questions about it. So I think especially if you're rolling it out now is just making the time to be available. Set the open office hours for the next 6 months out on everyone's calendar just so that they have the option. Make sure to do morning, make sure to do evening, make sure to do afternoon office hours. Make sure to just prep ahead of time. People get emails all the time, system updates, system change, this, that. Those probably just get filtered out. Make sure you have other resources that they use, whether it's Slack or an intranet or whatever the case may be. Make sure you're speaking their language. Some people like to read long emails. Some people want to see it in picture form. Some people want to watch a 3-minute video. Some people want to talk to you live every time they do it. Are you meeting all of the needs? I think that's the most important thing.
No, and
I agree.
Yes, no, I was going to say the current environment, I think, also supports the notion that you should not try and solve every problem. Find a solution that's going to be simple, that's going to be modern, that's going to have a modern interface, that your users are going to recognize and understand, and they're going to know how to use it without any training. I mean, that's been remarkable for us. People find their way and they figure it out, and it doesn't take a lot of hand-holding. But starting small and solving one problem at a time is going to be more successful, I think, in this environment than trying to solve every problem and roll out a big solution across a whole enterprise. That's very complicated.
I would add to that like I echo what Charles said. We chose a solution where no training was required. And I'm constantly telling people that, like, yes, I make announcements, whenever there's a change where we're introducing, for example, a new workflow or a new way of doing something, we'll have the in-person announcement. For example, it'll take a few minutes, right? Because I always try to keep everything as short as possible. Just take a few minutes in a sales meeting, right? To condition people. This is coming. It's not here yet. Reach out to me and ask questions. But that was just like one prong, right? So we announce it, we prime people, we let them know it's coming, but we also let them know here's help when you need it. So, we do put together I put together a detailed instruction manual that's linked at every workflow, right? So you don't have to dig through a Google file or where are my resources? No, it's like front and center. You don't need it, but if you want guidance, if you're like me, that's a nerd that wants to read like every instruction manual so I can find out all the functionalities, I have that for you. But if you don't like to read, right, in our TLDR culture, here's a little gist, and also paying attention. Like a lot of times, for example, and this is not working at a giant company like L'Oreal, my company is a bit smaller, but I get to keep an eye on people, right? Like I understand who I'm onboarding. Everybody gets the same like sort of snippet of onboarding and constant contact from me. If I see you, because I have like access in my CLM to see where someone is in a process and I know it's your first time doing something, I'll take a couple minutes out of my day and just reach out. Hey, are you stuck here? To let people know that I'm an available resource that you can always tag. And, I can see that by the way that my Slacks blow up, like people are always reaching out and my solution is like 1 sentence long or 2 seconds long, but I anticipate the pain points. I listen to people, right? Like because I'm reaching out one-on-one, I even put together this training. I called it a survey, but it was really like a sneaky training where like, I went through a few things to understand how people wanted to learn. And that's what gave me the idea of like, let me put together these like tiny GIFs for you, right? They were always like looking at GIFs on Reddit or the internet. So how do you like to learn? Do you want a workshop? Do you want a GIF? Like, is this something, and I put an example of a GIF, like, is this useful to you? And then the next section was tips and tricks, but it was really a training so that you could uncover like all these shortcuts and different functionalities. But the point is that it was interactive. And then finally at the end, I left like a section for comments because I wanted people to express themselves. And I love my squeaky wheels. And I also really love that we started the rollout with our sales organization, because who is more vocal than your salespeople? You know, who will be the first to tell you that something is too slow or that something's not working or something's not clunky? And so when you hold the space for people, they feel more comfortable doing that. And it's those squeaky wheels, the questions that you're constantly being asked, that will then point to you, what should my FAQs look like? You know, is this a problem? Like, is there a root problem here? If everyone's asking the same question and having the same issue, like, is there something that I can change or that I can suggest to my CLM? You know, product team, this is a recurring issue. You think there's anything we can do about it? And if you're lucky enough to have like a CLM that's still evolving, like Ironclad is, in the sense that like I've never experienced like such responsiveness in feature rollout to very specific examples that we're giving them about where pain points are. Like, that's amazing. And that's what the real success of our implementation has been. The fact that that trust has enabled all that feedback, which is so valuable. You know, I can't fix every problem, but I'm expert enough in the tool that I can reconceptualize it for you, right? Because sometimes it's not an issue of like something is complicated, I just didn't think about it this way. So let me adjust myself to your language. That's something that's going to help me and maybe uncover blind spots that we didn't recognize because we're just, you know, we understand how it works. That's not the case for everybody. So I think welcoming that feedback is key.
That's awesome.
I just wanted to jump in and say really quick that you should always take an opportunity to learn, even if you've done it. So I've had my system for 3.5 years. We've done it. Jacqueline just mentioned that she links an instruction manual to her workflows automatically so that there's like a live link there. And I just wrote myself a little sticky note, and that is what I'm going to go look at figuring out how to do so that it's right there for them again.
Yeah.
Yeah, meet people where they are.
I was going to say my last tip on that is to use like Bitly or another like URL shortener to make it like sweet up there, but yes.
Love it. This is the power of community live and happening in front of us. I love it. I love it. Okay, so now that you guys have had successful implementations, what is the one thing you kind of wish you could have done differently, or what do you wish you knew at the beginning? I guess kind of what advice would you give to someone who's starting this journey?
My advice would be to try to get your users to use the system as much as possible, right? So there was like quite a jump for us from going from MSAs and NDAs where we're only collecting a few pieces of information from our sales teams to then this very complex order form, right? Where there's all these conditions and all different products and pricing and things that you could put in. And so my idea was always to get our sales team to self-serve, create those order forms themselves, right? And so that transitional piece, which I wish I had advocated a little stronger for, I thought to myself would be, well, what if we have an AE upload an occasional order form that's already been signed into the system, just to get them into the practice of understanding, you know, what responses go in what fields. It also sort of increases their understanding of a contract, right? Like, just because you're selling the product doesn't mean you're always understanding the piece of paper that's, you know, closing that deal. So just the stickiness of that, getting them to go into the system a little more often by whatever means, even if it's a simple upload of a document, because now they're understanding a different feature and it would have prepared them to create those order forms a little bit faster.
For us, I would say identify your business ambassadors. So much of the adoption for us was, you know, the enthusiasm of some power users who were adept at technology and were also, you know, well known in their teams, and having those people spreading the word about what we're doing made a huge difference, I think, in adoption and getting people excited about this rollout.
I would say that don't think that your initial implementation is the end all be all. You should be able to think that that's your starting point and you did the best you could with the information you had at the time. And sometimes that information is limited, and I highly suggest that you go around and you talk to all your stakeholders and your key people and get them on board. And sometimes you think you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed and that it's going to be amazing. And sometimes it works great and sometimes it doesn't, but just know that that's not the end all be all, and that you can reiterate. You can scrap that and start again potentially if you need to, or that you can build on top of it. And I think that's really important. And I think simplicity, again, going back to that, is always thinking about making it as simple as possible, and testing it with your power users first helps with all of those things.
Oh, I love that. I call them my super users. And they're always my little beta group. And it's those few salespeople who are just always asking questions and always have, yielded these wonderful suggestions to improve the process, that then get to be the first ones to try something. And again, that trust is invaluable to them.
So here's a related question to that, which is basically about how do you collect and track feedback on the bugs, the feature requests you're looking for. And I'm sure, as you just mentioned, there's sometimes process and people requests, right? I know that when we were implementing some of the things in my past life, people would say, can we skip these approvers? Can we have less approvers? And I'm like, that's not a system challenge. That's finance and audit. Like, we've got to change the process on their end. That's, how do you guys track all the things that are coming your way? And, having been in your seats, you're often the one that's taken all the complaints. And how do you keep track of that and deal with those?
I think it's basically however you keep track and deal with everything else. Are you a sticky note person? Are you an email person? Are you a calendar person? I use a system called Airtable, which is, I call it like Excel for dummies. It's a really linked system that's, able to track a lot of things. And I just keep a running list. And I only recently started using it for that because I realized I was asking my customer service manager the same question like every 3 months, because I'd forgot that I'd asked it or what the answer was, and somebody new had brought up the question again. So I think it's however you normally work. Just start tracking it that way. Track the question, track that you asked it and what that answer was. And I would also put a follow-up date, because if you're using a CLM system that is new and current, they should be updating. They should be taking your feedback, in my opinion, and working to implement not everything, but a lot of what you're asking. If you're asking for it, I'm sure other clients are too.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's a combination of product feedback and process feedback. So, Mary, you're absolutely right. I mean, we can replicate lots of bad processes on a platform, and no one will want to follow them, or they will find ways around them. So we spend a lot of time just on the process and on working with all of the other approving teams, right, to try and define a process that we can replicate within a CLM system that's going to be better than the old way of doing it.
Yeah, I collect the data in 2 ways. Obviously, observation. If a group of people keeps having the same problem, then I have to then think that I can change. Is this like a misunderstanding on the process on their side, and something that may not even have to do anything with the system, but it's just the nature of what the current process is, and can we simplify it? So then you work with the stakeholders where you can do that. And the other one is through just that constant, one-on-one communication with them. And so depending on what the nature of the issues are, and especially if they're interrelated, I might just have one email with a bunch of related issues that I may send, to, for example, Ironclad. And I do that every so often. And I may not always, and not always get a great explanation back, maybe something's in development or we haven't thought of that. And I don't necessarily follow up on it, because oftentimes I'll see that it will be solved for in another update. And there's got to be a critical mass, not just from me, but also from other users, right? So sometimes I know something's on the horizon because the team, on the product is so great at communicating with me. Oh, this is something we thought about. We've gotten other feedback. And so I can bring that back. But then I always close the loop with my end user at my company. Hey, I looked into this, or hey, like this is the response I've gotten back, but I do get back to them pretty quickly because that's part of just, this whole like loop of trust. I'm working on it, or here's a workaround, but there's always a solution, even if it's something that we have to do internally to reconceptualize how we get this particular thing done. But on the product side itself, those go to, in my case, Ironclad.
Awesome, guys. We only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to pick one last question out of this long list of like amazing questions. There's some really good things in here. But since you guys are so great and everyone's kind of looking up to you, they're asking, how do you balance the demands of a rollout like this with other projects and your business as usual day jobs? Like, how do you fit in an implementation when you've got a million things going on?
Good question. I think the people who are running it have to be enthusiastic and committed to the project, and that's what's going to move forward, and that enthusiasm is going to rub off team members. And if you have the resources to hire help, do it. I think that's but the nature of a lot of business today is scarce resources. And like I said, ours was led by the legal team, and yeah, it was a huge lift for the legal team to do this on top of everything else. But again, we had people who are committed to seeing it through, and that's what made it successful.
Angela?
I had the luxury of this was my first task at Impossible, so I had the luxury of, they were like, we're not going to give you anything else. We're not going to start attaching you to email aliases or things like that. So that I definitely see as a luxury because I've rolled out other systems now and I don't have that luxury. You have to make a priority list, and some things need to get done, but they're not the priority right now, and they can wait a month, maybe. And that sounds bad, but I think that's all how we work, isn't it? That's how we manage our day-to-day lives. That's how we manage our work life. That's how we manage our personal life. Lots of things need to get done all the time, and you could do all of them right this second, but you can't, so you have to pick. And some things did fall off for a while, and I just let, again, that trust and that communication, let people know, I'm going to get to this, but it's not a priority. You don't need it now. I don't need to do it now, and I'm going to calendar this for a month from now, and we'll get back to you then.
I tend to channel data from Star Trek and just try to compute everything all at once, all the time. So my priorities are pretty clear in my role. There's probably one thing that takes precedence above. I would say like helping people understand Ironclad is my second priority. That really takes, the cake above all else, because number one, at this point, like a few months after like the major, the last major implementation that we had, the questions are so few and far in between. And because you're able to gauge the kinds of questions, again, like very few of them are just novel and one-offs, right? Like they tend to fall into specific categories. And so I think much like Angela mentioned earlier, like I have my snippets of information. I've got my collection of GIFs, right? Like nothing, they haven't not been anticipated. So it's very easy to respond to them quickly. So, when I'm not working on a customer contract, they get precedence over the other projects that I'm doing. And the system is designed in such a way that they shouldn't take very long to explain because there is no training involved. Everything should be pretty intuitive and obvious. And so I don't have very complicated questions. Now, if somebody needs, a one-on-one, a few minutes to just share their screen and having it, which I always offer to do you want me to just like walk you through it? Unless I'm working on a customer contract, I always have a few minutes to just, share your screen with me, because that's not a question they're going to ask again. Sometimes we even record it. And then they can just refer to that.
Well, Jacqueline, Angela, Charles, thank you so much for being amazing speakers and sharing so much with the community today. And thank you, CLOC, for having us. We will see you next time.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.